Hey, good afternoon, church family. My name's Alex. I'm one of the ministers here. It's the Seattle Church of Christ. And today I've got as our partner, Luke Donatello, our missionary to the Bellingham Church. Luke, welcome to our podcast today. How you doing, brother?
Thanks, Alex. I'm doing really good. Got the kids done with their homeschool today, so I'm free to just spend some time with my brother.
Amen. Well, today we're going to be doing the first part of a four-part series on politics and politics in the church. And this is something that I know we both have been desiring to do and desiring to talk about, because this year, obviously, with everything going on, it just feels like Christians have been really reaching out and wanting answers and wanting some direction from the church on how to look at this political landscape and make decisions, and how do we bear with each other during this time. So what do you think's made it so intense this year, brother?
There's a lot of things that I think have contributed. I think that COVID has certainly put everybody on edge. Feels like we're all a powder keg waiting to blow. And then I think too, just over the last number of years, our political situation has become more and more divided. And if I could share a quick anecdote just of even how it's affecting me personally, and
Yes.
please have an umbrella of grace over me because I'm embarrassed by this, but I had a nightmare the other night about politics, of all things. I feel like I shouldn't be anxious about it, but it literally gave me a nightmare. And there was just a rally on the White House lawn, and it was just, in my dream, I just saw just row after row of people just packed like sardines, and just cheering with masks off, and just the anxiety in me of just, they're all going to get COVID. Like, this is bad. And
Yeah.
I know, like, I'm not saying that to be controversial. We're trying to talk to people on different sides of the aisle. But I just say that to say that it shouldn't affect me, of all people. I know my Bible like the back of my hand. I know what it says about bringing my anxieties to the Lord in prayer. But it's seeping into my dreams. And I know there's a lot of people, too, that are just exhausted with it all, but it's psychologically draining.
Yeah. Bro, I mean, you don't have to qualify anything here. I mean, I hear it all the time from people. They're like, wow, I'm really stressed out right now. I don't know what I'm going to do if my candidate doesn't win. I'm feeling discouraged. I feel depressed about this country. And I think that goes for people on both sides of the political persuasion. And it's so funny you mentioned that. I didn't even talk to you about this, but I had a dream very similar about stuff going on in the country. And it involved me being in a submarine. So a naval ballistic sub. Very interesting. Okay. But enough about dreams. Let's talk here about politics for a little bit.
Yeah.
Maybe you could set the stage, because you and I think we both try to do a really good job of keeping politics really low on our priority scheme and what we believe in and how we preach. But, I know we've talked before and we have different political ideas sometimes, but we're really unified. Like, we're best friends. We talk all the time. We can hear different perspectives. I don't think we've ever had a contentious talk between us. And yet, I think I see something in us, and that's that when it comes to politics, we all want to see our side as having not sinned or being less sinful than the other side. And can you maybe touch on that a little bit? Is that fair for us to think, like, is one side better than the other? Should we endorse one side as ministers and ask our church to vote for that side versus another side?
I think it's a really dangerous precedent when we start doing that. Maybe people are familiar with this concept of confirmation bias, that once you have staked your claim, you defend it with every ounce of strength that you have. I've heard for, like, juries, for instance, when they're deliberating, that they're encouraged not to share what they think first. They can anonymously write down guilty or non-guilty, but they shouldn't say it out loud, because the moment you stake your claim, it doesn't matter. People can't change your mind about things. You will
Mhm.
defend, even if you're wrong, even if people bring up evidence, you have skin in the game. And so you will defend what you first said you believe. And so I think as ministers, it's really dangerous. And I think biblically, too, just what the scriptures tell us about mankind is that there is no perfect party, there is no perfect person. We're all sinners. Romans chapter 3, very famously, we know this one well. It tells us that we are all sinners. Verse 9, it asks the question, what then? Are we better than they? Not at all, for we have already charged that both Jews and Greeks are all under sin. As it's written, there is none righteous, not even one. There's none who understands. There's none who seeks for God. All of us outside of the cross of Christ are sinners. And even after the sin's been washed away by the blood of Jesus, we're still in this jar of clay. And so a lot of our ideas are going to be wrong, and certainly political parties are going to be wrong.
You mentioned something really great there in Romans 3, the idea of the universality of sin. And something that Michael Burns talks about in his book, The King's Church, which we've been going through as a region, is he talks about being careful not to have too much of an allegiance towards our political party, to consider one better than the other. Because what normally happens is we tend to see only the good in our party, and we tend to miss the bad. And when we do that, what it is that I think there's something appealing about each party to Christians who are voting for them. And I'm going to just throw out right now the idea that Christians are going to vote one way because they're racist, and Christians are going to vote one way because they are murderers and don't respect the right to life of unborn children. I'm going to throw out these wacky claims that are just don't make any sense. They're just based on producing anger and frustration and defending points. What I'm going to throw out here is that there are good things that each party stands for. I want to talk about that a little bit. And I want to share what I think some good things are in the conservative party or towards the right-leaning people, okay? People often ask, well, how could somebody vote for somebody who's conservative and you call yourself a Christian? And I think the conservative party stresses a lot in personal freedom and individual choice, which really resonates with a biblical message of choice and personal responsibility. I think the right, in a lot of ways, it defends unborn life, which a lot of people still, consider to be important in their worldview. It's not the only thing, but it's a part of it. And I think that the right kind of leans more towards not an equality of outcome, but equality of opportunity. That there needs to be opportunity for everyone to be successful in this country, to have a life, to do what's right, to be successful. And I think those things resonate, and I think people see that and they go, "Wow, that's pretty cool. I want to vote for those things." Right? What about on the left side? What do you think it is that people see that's really honorable and that really gets the attention of Christians?
Yeah, I love that question. Thanks, Alex. And real quick too, I just want to say that I love all the things you shared on the conservative side of things. I think they're all very biblical values. It makes me think of the Imago Dei, how we're made in the image of God, and there's a sanctity to each individual life. And even God in the garden didn't helicopter parent Adam and Eve, but he sent them off to do a task, and then he would hang with them in the cool of the afternoon. And I love that value of saying people should have some freedom to make decisions. And I think on the left side, what I find very attractive is the idea of being my brother's keeper. that there's a social contract I have because I live in a civil society that I should contribute some of my resources to help out other people. I like the idea of working collectively to build a better society. In some ways, too, I like the idea of law and order, although that's kind of counterintuitive. That tends to be a issue more on the right.
Right.
I like the idea of regulating businesses. I like the idea of corporate responsibility and making sure that they also have to pay their taxes. They also have to be held accountable if they're polluting and breaking the law. I like that side too, and that I think tends to be more an issue on the left.
Right. And I see those things too, and I really value them. You know, I look at those things and I go, wow, that makes sense to me. And I wish that both sides of our political, party would really focus on all of those things, which really do matter. Stewardship of our environment, those things are important and need to be done. So where I think it's important for us to know as Christians kind of gets into our last point here, and that's in Ephesians chapter 2. And I think this is something that we've talked about before. In his book, The King's Church, Michael Burns talks extensively about this, and it's about not giving our allegiance or our loyalties to a political side.
Mhm.
And I want to just kind of warn people of being careful not to do that. Because just like you said, if we go all in on something, then it really puts us in a really tough situation of defending things that maybe as Christians we have no business trying to defend, because it's really difficult, a difficult stretch to make, biblically, to defend some of the sin on both sides of the political equation. And look, I'm not telling people not to vote or not to have skin in the game, because I think that is an American right. And I think God would want Christians to influence the outcome of a vote.
Yep.
But what I think is important is if we go in feeling like our side is right and morally right and the other side's wrong, then we end up having to defend even the bad that goes along with our side, versus just saying, I have a preference here. And I believe the good in this side outweighs the bad in this side. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
And do you think that for years, at least, not maybe our church, but Christendom in general, made it seem like the conservative side was the Christian side?
I think there was a political strategy, especially in the 1980s,
Yeah.
especially in the Republican Party, to really court the evangelical vote. Yeah, I definitely think so. But it even stretches back to abolition and the way that that fight really split the church. Something that concerns me a lot, something I had read in the book Divided by Faith, is that for a lot of more social justice leaning Christians who felt that the church wasn't addressing those issues, they felt they had to make a split. And the negative impact of that was that they elevated social issues like the abolition of slavery, but they really downplayed issues of personal integrity. And what's now called liberal theology, or the liberal church, and I don't say liberal politically, but just
Right.
theologically, it tends to downplay the inspiration of Scripture, and
Mhm.
it tends to elevate teachings of social justice. And it does worry me if the church leans too heavily to say that conservative values are Christian values and liberal values are atheistic secular values. There's a certain portion of our church that will feel disenfranchised. And my concern is they will feel pushed out and
Right.
possibly even leave the faith.
Right. And I think in the same way of what you're talking about, I think now we're having a resurgence almost the other way, where it's like, well, the church is clearly liberal and needs to support these things. And if we don't, then we're wrong. And I think you're right. We got to be careful because we don't want to push out any element of our church. We don't want people to feel like they're on the outskirts simply because they don't believe what we believe politically about things, right?
Right.
Um, but anyway, we're talking about voting here. So Ephesians chapter 2, Consequently, you are no longer aliens or foreigners and strangers, but fellow citizens with God's people and also members of his household, built on the foundation of the apostles and the prophets, with Christ Jesus himself as the chief cornerstone. In him, the whole building is being joined together and rises to become a holy temple in the Lord. And in him, you two are being built together to become a dwelling in which God lives by his Spirit. We are told and admonished by scriptures to be foreigners and aliens as we live in this world. And it's so hard because this world feels like home. And this world feels like this is the place I'm going to live in forever, but it's really not. I know that like 12 years ago, I made a decision to abandon political loyalty to a political party. And it was really one of the most helpful things in my life. It's not easy. I don't always stick to it. But I was finding myself being called to a more of a like a political social upheaval than I was to a spiritual upheaval. And my question for you is, how as Christians do we maintain the balance? How can we have absolute loyalty to God, to being foreigners and aliens, to living and being kingdom people, and yet take matters like voting and politics, kind of with a grain of salt and put them in the proper perspective in our lives? What do you think about that, Luke?
Well, first of all, I'm so inspired by your example of choosing to lay down a political party. And it reminds me.
And it's an imperfect example, Luke. I'm trying. I'm just saying I try, but I know I fail. I know I do.
Sure. I mean, we're in jars of clay. Like our flesh is we're always in that battle between spirit and flesh. And I just was thinking of Isaiah 2 about laying down our swords and turning them into plowshares.
Yes.
And if I could speak directly to the church, it would just be lay down your swords, turn them into plowshares. I think the example that you just talked about of saying, I am going to sacrifice my political party for the sake of the kingdom, I think that's what needs to happen. I think of how James says that the anger of man does not produce the righteousness of God. I think we really need to be cautious with our anger and our indignation. Too often, it feels like it's righteous anger, and then we come to find out it wasn't righteous anger. And I don't always know when it is righteous. For me personally, what I try to do is never be angry. And then in the one instance where I just can't hold it in anymore, I'm going to pray and hope that it was righteous anger. Because I don't see any justification in my life to just let loose the juice.
Yeah.
Just turn on the anger. I read passages like I wrote it down here, 2 Timothy 2:24, that the Lord's servant must not quarrel. Just there's no excuse for it. I have no reason to quarrel, period. And what worries me, I think, sometimes for the church, Alex, is that sometimes I do think the church thinks that it's right for us not to quarrel, that somehow the Lord's servant is just those who are paid staff or Bible talk leaders, but that it's okay for just like normal Christians to quarrel or to just let loose their anger. And I would really encourage the church to rethink that, if that is the way they're thinking, that if you're called to be a disciple of Jesus, you are his servant and you must not quarrel. And yeah, I'll just leave it at that.
No, that's super powerful, Luke, and especially now as we understand the universality of sin, the imperfection on both sides. And if we can start with that and then decide that we're going to be committed to, a different world to come, a different kingdom, then we should be able to be measured in how we operate against these things. But look, I know we're humans, and I know somebody's going to post something on Facebook this week, and it's going to trigger us. And so, what I'm going to give people is, before you post and before you, respond, and if you feel triggered, to stop and think about a couple of things that we talked about today. Number one, Think about the universality of sin and flawedness. And think about the absurdness of trying to make one political party as God's means of righteousness in this world. God's plan of changing this world is not through politics, it's through the church, it's through us. And I think when we start thinking about it that other way, it's really gonna affect us. And then the second thing is just remembering that our allegiance is to God. When we said Jesus is Lord of our lives, it's not only a pledge of making Christ Lord, but it's also an allegiance to a new kingdom. This kingdom that Peter talks about here. We're foreigners and aliens here. We're just passing through. We ain't going to be here very long. Pretty soon, we're going to move on. And I think if we can keep that perspective, we can get through this as best friends and really reaching out to both sides of the party. So, party lines.
Yeah, love it. Just
Amen.
yeah.
Dude, thank you for being on with us. Thanks for your help today, brother. I love you as always. God bless you and your family. Miss you and can't wait for you to come down and get some sabbatical time with us, okay?
Yes, sounds great.
All right, man. Luke Donatello, missionary in Bellingham. Awesome. Stay tuned for our next podcast, church. God bless.